Hi, my name is Jim Mack, and today I want to take you through the operation and maintenance manual, particularly looking at the maintenance sections to how to determine things like fluid and oil types, maintenance intervals, and possibly even part numbers or capacities when available. We're going to look at two different manufacturers. We're going to look at a Caterpillar as well as a John Deere machine. If you can see here, I have a backhoe manual pulled up for several models, but we're going to focus on the 416D backhoe from Caterpillar. Now, I'm hoping you are familiar with operations manuals already, and you have used them for safety and controls and that information, but you'll notice that includes also a maintenance section. Now, if we go through here on the third page of this manual, it has a table of contents, and you can see it begins with that safety and operations sections. But about halfway through the manual, it'll typically begin a maintenance section. And on this machine, for this manual, it begins at page 123. While we're on this table of contents in the beginning, I'd like to point out that all of these operations manuals include an index at the end that can be very helpful if you're looking for one specific piece of information. It's not always laid out in the same order across manufacturers or even across one manufacturer through different models. It can be in slightly different places. So if you're looking for one thing in particular, that can help guide you there quickly. But for our purposes, we're going to go down to that maintenance section that starts on around page 123. And we'll see that that's going to start with tires. So you'll notice at the top it says maintenance section, and it references the tire inflation and gives you the shipping pressures. Notice that the recommended pressure is going to vary by the size of the tire and possibly by the ply rating. Do know that the pressure on the sidewall of a tire is not necessarily what you should inflate a tire to. That is the maximum. You should never exceed that, but the manufacturer will provide what pressure you should inflate it to. It may be less than what's on the sidewall. So you can go through this. You'll notice that here we have the pressures for the rear tires. Looking at the next page on this Caterpillar manual, it takes us into our recommended lubricants and viscosities. So let's just look at our engine crankcase here. You'll see that it recommends a few different possible oils. DEO, CAT DEO, the DEO stands for diesel engine oil, multi-grade synthetic, and at the bottom it has more of a generic CG4 multi-grade oil. Now there's several different viscosities recommended. Now it will depend on your climate, so pay attention to that. Look at where this machine is going to be operating. Pick something that will be between the min and max. So for our location here, a SAE 15W40 that goes down to 15 degrees Fahrenheit and up to 122 degrees Fahrenheit probably covers most our conditions. If we were worried about operating in a little colder temperatures, I would probably go with something more like a 1040 that goes down to 0 degrees Fahrenheit. We have the same for our transmission, our hydraulic system. The charts work the same for our axles. All of our lubricants are going to be included on this chart, and it can tell us the right type of oil. Notice it is not telling us the amount, however. On this next page, here we have our capacities. That's what they often call the amount of oil we would need. If you are doing service, this can help you know how much oil you have to have on hand or how much you have to order. Now this doesn't tell you the type. We saw that in the previous chart. Here you have to match up the amount of oil you need for any one of these compartments. And it is nice that it is giving us the refill capacity. For example, the hydraulic system probably contains far more oil than what you see here, but when we drain it, we only need a refill amount because the amount in the hoses and the cylinders is going to remain. It gives us guidance on welding on the machines. And then this next page is very important. This is to me, this is the table of contents of the maintenance section. What it does is it breaks down our maintenance intervals by hours. Typically, if we go to the bottom here, we have 10-hour service, and then we have 50, 250 in this case, 500, 1,000 hours, 2,000 hours, and so on. You will notice that there is this whole section also that's called when required, that there is not a necessary hour amount tied to it, but things like replacing bucket cutting edges or the battery, fuses, Also how to adjust tracks, not on this machine, but on a track machine would fall under when required. So reference that as needed. It is nice. It gives a page number to each of these. Now, if we're looking at doing a particular service, let's say we're doing a 2,000-hour service, which begins on the next page, my recommendation is to start with the 2,000-hour service items, but understand that all of these previous intervals, a 1,000-hour item is going to hit at 2,000 also. 500-hour items are going to hit at 1,000, 1,500, and 2,000. So basically, a 2,000-hour service is going to include those items and then everything before them, everything lesser. Notice that there is a line item for initial 500 hours. That's for the first 500 hours it hits. You won't do that anytime after that. But we have our 250, 50, and so on. The reason I recommend starting with the 2,000-hour items first is sometimes you'll see things on here like change engine oil and filter. That happens at 500 hours. And if I go down to 10 hours, it's check engine oil level. Well, if I already changed my engine oil level and filter and refilled it to the proper amount, I can skip some of these prior steps. I would not want to start here checking oil levels and then later find out that I have to drain them only to recheck them again. It's not efficient use of time. So just based on experience, the recommendation would be to start at the high hour items and work your way down. And you can see the only two items specific or unique to the 2,000-hour service is replace the engine crankcase breather and change the hydraulic system oil. But like I said, we would then do all of these items prior. We can use this like a table of contents, so you can go through sections. Now notice that these jump all over, so you can use it like a checklist, but basically go to that page number. It will tell you how to do that. So for our example, let's go to replacing the engine crankcase breather on page 150. Go down to that section. And here's what it walks you through step by step. It gives me a picture which calls out some of the parts, telling me to loosen the clamp, remove the screws, discard the gasket, take the cover off, and then it walks through the process of how to replace that and reinstall it. This one even gives me the torque specs. Okay. So this can be very helpful for guiding you through the process. We already saw our capacities. We saw a lot of our information on how to service it. This would cover all the maintenance for the machine. You'd work through there for what you need. Now, as far as part numbers, we didn't see anything with that. We would have to reference the parts manual to match that up. In there, we might find a section that just has maintenance parts, or we'll have to go to those specific sections that match up with the line items, looking for the fuel filters, engine oil filter, that crankcase breather that we saw. So that's how it's laid out for this CAT machine. Remember, there is an index at the very end. Can be very helpful to find, one particular thing. If I'm looking at how to service a cooling system, possibly replace a belt, that would be on page 134. Please reference that as needed. Let's look at our John Deere machine. Here we're going to be looking at a crawler dozer from John Deere, several models again, but we'll focus on the smaller one, the 450H, and we'll start by going to that table of contents again. Now this one's a little further down. I believe starts on page 10 or somewhere around here, page 11. And you'll see that, again, just like all of our operator's manual starts with a whole section on safety, starts on operation, controls. In fact, this whole first page is covering safety and operation. When we get to the next page, though, we can see that we find the maintenance section, beginning at the 3 series of page numbers, going all the way through to the end of the manual. So we're going to jump there. And that's going to start right here on page 77. Notice again, the heading at the top of the page is going to say maintenance as opposed to operations. This one starts by telling me the diesel fuel requirements, the type of fuel recommended, and that may change based on temperatures. If we look at our next page, it's still about the diesel fuel, synthetic lubricants. Now we get into our engine oil. It talks about the engine oil recommended. And this will often tell you what engine oil it's equipped with. It's referenced that it comes with break-in oil, and after that they give the recommendation. Please remember, I forgot to point this out on the CAT one, sometimes there's little footnotes there that can tell you what, give you some specific information about the oils, particularly what oil it came with from the factory. So do reference those footnotes. For our engine oil, they lay theirs out as more of a graphical instead of a grid, but kind of the same thing. We have several options of viscosity. Again, it's going to be depending on the climate where we're operating this machine. So if you're operating below freezing, these two oils would not be suitable. Again, here in Pennsylvania, we're probably looking at something more like a 15W40 or maybe a 10W40 to cover a nice wide operating range. Now, I do want to caution you, there will often be one on there, like SAE0W40 that covers the entire gamut of temperature range, which seems like, hey, I could just use that in everything. And you could. The thing is, there's a cost to that. That is not going to be as cheap or economical as some of these other oils. So I don't just recommend going with the one with the widest temperature operating range unless it's needed. If you can narrow it down to what's realistic for your climate, that's probably going to allow you to run a better, more cost-efficient oil. We have the same for our transmission. Make sure we're picking the correct oils. There's more than just viscosity. We want to make sure we're running torque guard oil, or they reference some alternatives. Final drives, they lay it out horizontally, and here we have 3 oils. Arctic oil, obviously for very cold temperatures. It can only go up to 14 degrees. And then most of ours are going to be running a high guard J20C or a 80W90 gear oil in our final drives, would provide similar operating ranges. If it has a winch, there's recommendations for that oil. There's recommendations for the coolant. And now we get into our maintenance section. It references where you'll find some of the charts. This one's under the hood for the machine. How to check the hour meter to determine what maintenance is needed. Filling the fuel tank, it does give us our fuel tank specifications here. It mentions how to test our coolant using test strips. And here we get into a pretty neat chart. So this chart could be printed out, used as a checklist. It's service intervals. Gives you some items you can fill out: customer, serial number, hour meter reading. And it has the as required items, 10 hour. But notice this next part, which we didn't see with our CAT machine, is required parts. On this machine, it tells us what hours, how many of these parts we need, and it even gives us a column with a part number. That can be very helpful to you in putting together a parts list. If I was doing a 500-hour service, I know that I need these 2 part numbers and then these 5 items here. I would not need any of these. I would need a winch oil filter if it was equipped. You can see for a 2,000-hour service, I'm going to need one of every part number on there. This also references our fluids. It gives me part numbers by the quart. A lot of times we'll be buying them by the gallon or maybe even a 5-gallon, but it does give me part numbers to begin with. It also gives me capacities, refill capacities on this same chart. In our last manual, we had to go to a few different pages to find that information. Here's our kits for sampling oil. Several of these will be the same kit, coolant conditioner as well as our coolant sample kits. And then we get down to our 100-hour, 250-hour, 500-hour service all the way down to 2,000. Again, my recommendation would be to start with if I'm doing a 2,000-hour service, I'd start with these items. I have 3 items on here. Check and adjust our engine valve lash, change hydraulic system oil and filter, change transmission system oil and filter. And then I'd work my way backwards. Some of these items will have already been done. For example, checking my transmission oil level would occur at I believe a 50-hour service. I'm not going to need to do that if I already did that as part of my 2,000-hour service portion of it. So this is a handy checklist. Use it as that. Print it out as needed. And then it goes into the maintenance section. Now, the one thing that's laid out different here, it's starting with our as required, which we said don't have any particular intervals. Notice it gives me how to change the serpentine belt with or without air conditioning. It goes through checking and adjusting track sag. But if we go down here, we'll get into sections where it's telling me that, hey, this is 500-hour service items. It goes through them. We're going to skip down to our 2,000-hour service items, okay, which we can see start here with our valve lash, our hydraulic oil and filter. Shows me photos of what panels to remove, what valves to open to drain it. There's our filter, and then it gets into how to change the transmission filter. So typically if I'm doing a 2,000-hour service, I would start with those 3 items, and then I would work backwards. I'd get into my 1,000-hour items where I'd do the hydraulic breather filter if it's equipped. I would do the winch oil and filter if it's equipped, and work my way backwards, servicing what's needed. Now, one thing, we already did see some of the capacities, but if you weren't sure, again, this has an index at the back, but you'll see here later in the manual where it gives our weights and some of the dimensions of the machine. It also will give me, here's my weights for the 450H, but here it gives me my drain and refill capacities. So it tells me how many, in this case, quarts or gallons, whatever's indicated, each of these compartments would take or hold, which can help in servicing it or performing the needed maintenance. Like I said, this one is very helpful for putting together a parts list. Some manufacturers will provide that. Some will not include part numbers in the operator's manual. In that case, you have to reference the parts manual and find the items needed for that service. So I'm hoping this helps you navigate the maintenance portion of the operation and maintenance manual to determine what needs to be done and glean as much information from that manual as possible. Thank you.